You just revealed everything.
The crystal chandelier shone above a ballroom full of shiny shoes and clinking glasses. Everyone who was important in Chicago's business world was here tonight. Tuxedos, fancy dresses, and bargains were murmured over champagne flutes. It was intended to be a night of fun, until a half-full burgundy red wine glass sailed across the room. It didn't collapse on its own. Someone threw it, right at her. Arielle King didn't move. The dark red wine splattered on her white silk dress, drenching her hair and running down her collarbone. But what about her eyes? They never left his. Preston Wycliffe, the son of Harold and Marilyn Wycliffe, who owned the largest private logistics business in the Midwest, stood there with a smirk on his face and the glass still in his hand. His parents laughed, and they didn't even try to hide it. Their chuckle broke through the music like glass breaking. Someone let out a gasp. A flash from a camera went off. Then there was stillness. Arielle carefully grabbed for the linen napkin on her table, dabbed her cheek without saying anything, and stood up straight. Her voice didn't shake or get higher. She actually didn't say anything. She turned around, walked to the platform, and took up her role as the main speaker again, even though she was dripping wet. She moved the mic and looked straight at the crowd from the podium. "We all come from somewhere," she stated in a calm voice. "But tonight, I don't want to talk about where I came from. I'm here to remind you of why I'm still here." The mood in the room changed. Many were anxious, puzzled, and ashamed. Some people get power from their parents. Some people work for it. But the difference between the two, she said, is that earned power doesn't have to yell. And then she grinned. Not the smile you give when someone compliments you. The kind of smile that says, "You'll get it tomorrow." What occurred next was big news. But it wasn't the video, the wine, or the slur that made it go viral. It was how Arielle converted stillness into power and got the whole country to watch. If you've ever wondered what revenge looks like when it's quiet, remain with me. This story is about respect, about power, and a decision worth around $650 million made in one breath. And if stories like this touch a nerve with you, something about fairness, kindness, or the strength of not letting the world make you small, think about signing up. We're just getting started. Now, take a big breath. What happened the next morning? It made everything different. Before the news, in front of the cameras, there was a woman who spent decades learning how to walk into a room full of people who didn't expect her to be there, before that night turned into a moment that the internet wouldn't let go of. Arielle King didn't grow up in boardrooms or with a lot of money. She was born in the city of Gary, Indiana. Her mom worked 2 shifts at a nursing home. Her dad drove trucks across state lines for long periods of time. Arielle saw bills pile up and lights go out as she grew up. But she also saw her mother iron uniforms at 5 in the morning and still have time to braid Arielle's hair before school. She had read every book in her local library about business strategy and leadership by the time she was 14. She didn't read for fun. She read to stay alive. She knew from the start that she had to change how she perceived herself before she could change how other people saw her. And so she went up. Best in her high school class. Full ride to Northwestern. Wharton School of Business MBA. The first black woman under 30 to top Forbes' self-made list with a net worth of more than $100 million. But she never showed off her watches or automobiles on social media. She got her power from being quiet, being still, exactness. At the age of 35, she was the CEO of Aurelia Ventures, a tech-savvy infrastructure company that changed the way cities with few resources get their supplies. Yes, she had offices in New York, D.C., and Chicago. She never actually left the Midwest. She thought you should fix what raised you. The Wycliffe family lived on the other side of town, both literally and figuratively. Money from the past, A lot of money. Wycliffe Freight Group, their business, had been around for 3 generations. What began with railroads grew to include transportation, ports, and aviation logistics. They moved everything from weaponry for the Pentagon to organic quinoa for grocery stores in California. The head of the family, Harold Wycliffe, sat on several state boards. Marilyn, his wife, oversaw 2 foundations and was said to hold vetting dinners for people who might become business partners. Preston, their son, was the kind of guy who strolled into a meeting and expected a chair to be waiting for him, even if he didn't know what the meeting was about. The Wycliffes were not used to being pushed. They were used to getting compliments. Their main office was in a 60-story structure in downtown Chicago that looked out over the lake. Aurelia Ventures, on the other hand, had an open-plan office in a remodeled auto shop on the south side. It wasn't just the furniture that was different between cultures. It was also their morals, their history, and how they treated individuals who couldn't help them. The Illinois Business Association's annual banquet was supposed to celebrate relationships that are forward-thinking, innovative, and strong. Aurelia was selected Woman of the Year. The award was based on merit and voted on by peers. The Wycliffes couldn't stop it either, but they could talk quietly. Someone in a prep meeting stated, "She's a diversity token." "Looks good in the press photos," another person joked. Even after Aurelia was named a finalist for a merger that could help both companies, combining Wycliffe's countrywide shipping with Aurelia's data systems, they didn't consider her as an equal. They thought she was necessary. The gala was intended to be a place where everyone could get along, a place to put differences aside. But power doesn't play by the rules. Preston Wycliffe had seen her name on the list of people who will get awards weeks before. He didn't like it. Not because she wasn't good at it, but because she was everything he wasn't. Gotten, honored, scared for the right reasons. He thought she was a troublemaker. He was just noise to her. The Langston Grand Hotel, an Art Deco landmark on Michigan Avenue, hosted the banquet. The ballroom was full of fresh hydrangeas and golden sunshine. In the backdrop, a jazz trio played Miles Davis. Waiters moved between guests with silver trays. It was fancy to hide the politics behind. Aurelia didn't care about chandeliers or cold oysters, though. It was about taking back space without asking for permission. People turned when she walked into the room that night. She was wearing a black dress and gold shoes, and she was serene because she understood her worth. Not because she was too loud, but she didn't have to be. And somewhere in that ballroom, a young man who thought he was better than everyone else and didn't know it was about to learn what happens when you don't respect the right women. Before the party, before the cameras caught what they thought was the moment everything changed, there was a different kind of fight. One with no headlines or witnesses, yet just as stinging. The kind that happens behind closed doors, in boardrooms with climate control, water pitchers that never run out, and chairs that sink too softly. 3 weeks before the gala, Arielle King entered the executive suite on the 59th level of Wycliffe Freight Group's main office. She had already met the Wycliffes once before. Not the helpers, not the managers in the middle, the actual ones. Harold, Marilyn, and Preston. The merger looked like a good idea on paper. Wycliffe required Aurelia Ventures' AI-powered infrastructure software to stay relevant in a world that was changing. Wycliffe had the size, the fleets, and the ability to get contracts that Arielle had been trying to get for years. They might work together to automate logistics on a national scale. But partnerships aren't merely for making money. They're about power. For the Wycliffes, power had always looked, sounded, and sat on a specific side of the table. Arielle donned a fitted blue pantsuit, modest heels, and no jewelry save for a gold cuff that her mother gave her when she achieved her first promotion. She was always 10 minutes early. Not to show off, but her time was never up for discussion. Marilyn Wycliffe walked into the room with a clipboard and an attitude that said she only put up with disruptions when she made them herself. Harold was already sitting down and pretending to be astonished by the folder he was reading. And Preston, he was 15 minutes late. He walked in with a coffee in one hand and his phone in the other. He didn't look up as he said, "Hope we didn't keep you long." Arielle smiled. but it wasn't the kind that says, "I'm sorry." The kind that keeps in mind. They started with small talk, then numbers, then projections. Her voice was calm and steady. She told them how their software may help Wycliffe save 18% on overhead costs in the first year of business. How using predictive analytics could cut delivery delays by about 30%. How vendors owned by minorities, who were generally overlooked, could cut the cost of materials by building stronger loyalty in the community. That final point made Harold's eyebrow twitch. With his arms crossed, Preston reclined back in his chair. "And what's your plan?" he continued in a casual tone, "to make this easier for our more traditional clients to understand." Ariel looked him in the eye. "We don't want to make progress easy to understand. We want to make it standard." There it was, the wall that can't be seen. Marilyn turned the page in her notes. "It's a big goal," she remarked, "but we're also dealing with how shareholders see things. How people see things matters." Ariel slowly nodded. Perception is what kept supply chains broken for decades. The debate went off track, or rather, into shallow waters. Preston started giving suggestions that sounded more like instructions. Harold told Ariel she was wrong about a stat she had checked twice. Marilyn recommended putting a face on the data, maybe having Ariel lead the rollout in cities with a lot of PR, like Chicago, Atlanta, maybe Oakland. You know, the same old thing. Code. Every sentence was polite, yet every tone was cold. There was no negotiation. It was a test. Would she close her eyes? Would she change herself to fit the frame they had already made? She didn't. She rose up and closed her folder instead. "Thanks for the time," she said. "When you're ready to talk like partners instead of people who are guarding a gate that's already falling apart, my door is open." The room stopped moving. Harold coughed. "Wait a minute, let's not hurry out because of a few mistakes." Ariel said, "No misunderstanding, just clarity." She left. "Take the elevator to the lobby." On the street to her car. Every breath was used. The agreement wasn't over. Not yet. But it was hurt. And what about the Wycliffes? They weren't used to getting hurt. Later that night, Preston sent his parents an email with just one line. "She won't do what you say. She needs to be told again where the line is." He didn't mean policy. He wasn't serious. He meant to take charge. And in his universe, there were always penalties for being in charge. What he didn't know, and what none of them knew, was that Ariel had seen the line a long time ago. She just never meant to stay behind it. The ballroom smelled like jasmine and wood that had been polished. A live quartet played music that flowed softly under the sound of people talking and laughing. Waiters glided through the gathering like clockwork, bringing tiny dishes and refilling champagne glasses. It was elegance planned down to the second, an illusion of harmony. Ariel King came in 20 minutes after the hour. Not late, not yet. Just at the right time, people began to wonder where she was. The room saw her right away, not because she wanted attention, but she never had to. She donned a long black dress that was made of satin and had small beads down the side. No gaudy jewelry and no stylist following you around. Just her, fully there, completely calm. The gala was meant to honor new ideas, but it was also about being the best, even with the shiny chandeliers and brand-sponsored backdrops. Who came in with whom? Who stood close to whom in the pictures of the group? Who was talked about in the speeches and who wasn't? Ariel wasn't stupid about it. She had been to gatherings like this for years. She knew how to use the room. Who smiled just enough to be kind. Some people looked at her too closely, while others didn't look her in the eye at all. But she wasn't here to sing tonight. She was here because she deserved it. As the ceremony started, the audience slowly quieted down. The MC talked about Ariel's accomplishments, like how her company changed supply chains, her charitable activities, and her record-breaking deal pipeline. People clapped. Applause that is real. Not the sort you do because you have to, but the kind that comes up when someone makes you rethink what success means to you. She walked to the stage, picked up the glass award, and gave a short, impassioned statement about what it means to be innovative when you start from scratch. About the labor you can't see that goes into changing systems that weren't made for you. This time, the crowd clapped even louder. Preston Wycliffe was watching from across the room with a glass of bourbon in his hand. He didn't clap. He leaned in and said something to a friend that was cocky and made the guy next to him laugh and look away. He then took a new glass of red wine from a passing waiter and started to weave his way through the crowd. Ariel had just gotten off the stage and was talking to a local business owner she had helped when she felt someone come up behind her. "Great speech," Preston replied with a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ariel turned around, calm and polite. "Thanks. Happy you stayed for it." "Of course," he answered, raising the glass a little. "I wouldn't miss the part where the underdog gets to be the star." She lifted an eyebrow, not happy. "That's funny. I don't consider myself an underdog anymore." "Sure," he said with a nod, "but some of us want to know how the show ends." Then, out of nowhere, no trip, no stumble, he tipped the glass forward. The wine hit her shoulder first, then it ran down the front of her dress. Deep crimson on black satin, sticky, warm, and sour. The gasps arrived a beat too late. Then there was stillness. It wasn't a splash. It was rude. The kind of deed that is meant to humiliate, not merely shame. A sentence, a note. His parents were close by. Marilyn laughed quietly, like people do at country clubs when the staff does something funny. Harold said something to her in a whisper. Neither of them moved to help. Someone took out a phone. Someone else took a picture. Like static, a wave of murmurs rippled around the room. Ariel didn't say anything, not at first. She stared at her clothing and then at Preston. His smirk had gotten bigger. He thought he had won something. She blinked once. Then she turned to a table nearby and grabbed up a cloth napkin. She touched the edge of her lip, not the wine, as if she were cleaning up after dessert. Then she grinned. It wasn't required. It wasn't soft. It was knowing. She leaned in close enough for just him to hear. "You just gave me the power I didn't know I needed." And then she left. Past the visitors who were frozen in place. Past the photographers who were unsure whether or not to take pictures. Past the stage where she had just been standing, with her head held high and her stride steady. The wine had left a mark on her dress, but it didn't take away her power. Ariel didn't leave in a hurry. She didn't yell. She didn't tell the music to stop or ask security to kick Preston out of the premises. She didn't ask for justice or get a group of people together to show that she was in pain. She just left. And by doing that, she expressed more than any explosion ever could. She walked through the ballroom with the grace of someone who has been through a lot worse than red wine. Her heels made a delicate clicking sound as they hit the polished floor. Each stride was planned, and each breath was measured. She didn't turn around. People moved out of the way as she walked by, not sure if they should say something or say sorry for someone else's bad behavior. She didn't give them anything. Not a glance. No nod. Nothing to make them feel better. It wasn't her job to take care of it. She walked into the hallway, leaving behind chandeliers and muttered regrets. Her driver was waiting outside, as he often was. She got in the car without saying a word. Ariel finally let out a breath inside the quiet car. Not because she had been holding her breath, but she had been holding on to her authority. She didn't need to let off steam. She didn't have to yell into the emptiness. She knew what had just transpired. Not merely a moment of rudeness, but a planned way to humiliate someone in public. A test of limits. And Preston had not passed it. Not her. While the automobile was in traffic, her aide Maya called from the hotel lobby. "Do you want to make a formal complaint?" "No," Ariel answered in a calm voice. "Let him have a good night's sleep. Let them all." Maya thought for a moment. "Are you sure?" Ariel said, "I have something better in mind. Talk to you tomorrow." She hung up. She understood that people would be angry. They would want her to go on social media and write a nicely crafted message about how to keep your dignity and grace under pressure. They would expect her to act out her grief in a way that made other people feel better about seeing it happen. But Ariel wasn't made to meet expectations. She was made to get things done. The pictures would show up by sunrise. The internet would do what it always does: record, respond, and become angry. But Ariel didn't want the noise. She needed to be in charge. And quiet, when used the right way, is the best way to manage someone. She got home soon after midnight. The skyline of the city blinked through her living room windows, and her house was calm. She didn't switch on the lights. She proceeded to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and sat still at the island. Her outfit was damaged, her hair was sticky at the ends, but what about her mind? Sharpened. A printed copy of the Wycliffe-Aurelia Agreement, which may be worth $650 million, was on the counter. It had pages of predictions, breakdowns, and risk models. A deal she had been working on for almost 9 months. She was ready to sign an agreement in less than 48 hours. She looked at it for a bit, then pushed it away. They didn't think she was strong enough. They thought she needed their platform, resources, and identity to grow. They believed she was giving in by not saying anything tonight, that her walkaway was a sign of weakness. They felt they could make her feel bad and put her back in her place. But Ariel didn't lose who she was just because a privileged kid wanted to make a scene. And what they didn't know, because they had never thought about it before, was that Ariel always had a backup plan when she walked into a room. Or a third, or a fourth. The next morning, her email was full. Messages from friends, board members, and clients who had seen pictures online and wanted to check in. Some even made public comments of support. Some people wanted to talk to them. A few others wanted to know what she was going to do next. She didn't answer any of them. Not yet. Instead, she set up a press conference on her laptop. In 12 hours. No word, no teaser, just a moment, a location, the name of her. Maya called again when she saw the calendar change. "Are you not signing?" Ariel smiled. "I'm not going to say anything," she said. "I'm just going to show them who they messed with." She stood in front of the mirror in her bathroom that night. She had on a navy blue blazer, a little bit of makeup, no earrings. She pushed her hair back tightly. Her serenity was like armor all over her. She didn't practice her speech. She didn't write one. Because the truth, it didn't need any extra clothes. It just needed to be heard. Before the sun came up, the footage was online. It was simply a snippet at first, a shaky, vertical video of the ballroom taken from the far end. The lights weren't quite right. The sound was a little hard to hear. But what about the moment? There was no doubt about that. A young white man, looking like he was rich and having a good time, poured a glass of red wine over the head of a black woman in a black satin gown. There wasn't a stumble. No reason. Just being arrogant. The crowd's reaction in the video was telling. Gasps, stillness, and then nervous laughing, mostly from the side where his parents were. At about 6:45 a.m., someone put it on Twitter with a short caption, "This is how the Wycliffes treat black excellence in 2025. The tweet got a lot of attention right away. It received more than 20,000 retweets by 8 a.m. It garnered more than 1 million views by lunchtime. People on TikTok cut the video into parts and added dramatic music, voiceovers, and even slow-motion edits. Some people who made the video reacted in real time with anger, grief, or astonishment. There were a lot of posts on Instagram with the hashtag #JusticeForAriel. Influencers, activists, and even famous people shared the video again, identifying news organizations and calling for responsibility. Screenshots of the moment, Ariel dabbing her face with a handkerchief, Preston smirking, and Marilyn giggling in the background, spread like wildfire. It wasn't simply about what happened, it was about what it stood for. People saw something they knew in every part of the internet, a pattern that was too similar but dressed up in tuxedos and served with desserts. An accomplished black woman was treated badly in a place where she had earned her place. A wealthy white family making fun of her dignity. A room full of people who aren't sure if they should help or stay quiet. The algorithms made it go up. The anger made people click. But underneath the noise was real, searing pain. News organizations rushed to catch up. Some morning shows argued about whether the event should be called a hate crime or merely an unfortunate misunderstanding. Conservative critics called it a harmless prank, while liberal commentators called it a symptom of deep systemic rot. But what about the public? They weren't arguing, they were very angry. Students at college demonstrated outside Wycliffe Freight's offices in Chicago. Alumni from Northwestern and Wharton, Ariel's institutions, created petitions asking for responses from both schools. Wycliffe Freight employees released internal memos without giving their names, demonstrating that the corporation was trying to control the story. Still, Ariel didn't say anything. No press release, no need to say sorry, no tweet, no comment, nothing but quiet. And that quiet made the conversation louder. All the influencers who had ever shaken hands with the Wycliffes suddenly had to explain themselves. Corporate partners were pushed to pick a side. Brands that had previously sponsored events with the Wycliffes started to surreptitiously take their logos off of websites and event reels. Not even Wycliffe Freight personnel could ignore the tsunami. Some people asked for transfers. Some people called in sick. A few people quit publicly on social media, saying it was because of personal ethics. By the conclusion of the first day, Wycliffe Freight's stock price had decreased 4.6%. Not too bad, but the warning shot had hit. The fact is, this wasn't the first viral scandal to shake up a strong family. Hundreds had been on the internet, but this one was different. Because Ariel didn't want anyone to feel sorry for her. She didn't act angry. She didn't act like a victim. She just showed the world what it had always tried to ignore. And folks were sick of acting like they didn't know the script. They looked at her. They could see themselves. And they wanted justice not just for Ariel, but for all the times someone like her had to choose between being quiet and staying alive. Every time a joke in the boardroom went unchallenged. Every time someone was condescending to someone who was excellent. Every time someone sat down at the table, they were humiliated. All she did was walk away. But that peaceful walk had turned into a revolution. A drone photo of Ariel's office from above appeared on YouTube that night, just as the sun was setting behind the metropolitan skyline. The glass windows showed gold. The text said, "The calm before the storm." It wasn't an official trailer, but it could have been, because everyone was watching now. Everyone wanted to know one thing. What was she going to do next? The internet was still hot when the first serious crack appeared. It wasn't in public, but from the inside. It all began with an email from someone who didn't give their name, sent at 3:12 in the morning to a number of journalists, a nonprofit watchdog group, and one of the most outspoken TikTok users who were writing about the controversy. The subject line was easy. You should see what they say when no one is around. There were 7 PDF files attached, a lot of screenshots, memos for the office, email conversations between top managers at Wycliffe Freight. Some were from months ago. Some people even just 2 days before the gala. At first, it seemed like normal business talk, like updates on logistics, leadership, and partnerships. But what about the language? It wasn't hard to see. A top VP called Ariel the optics candidate in an email, saying that merging with a black-owned firm might buffer future diversity criticisms. In another discussion, Preston and a board member joked about dressing her up for the photos and whether she'd bring too much Southside energy to the table. Someone even sent a Google Doc called Talking Points Managing the Aurelia Narrative. It was a draft with carefully coded language about cultural alignment, legacy compatibility, and a note to steer investors toward her brand story, not her race. It wasn't simply rude, it was a plan, and it made it plain that the Wycliffes never meant to treat Ariel as an equal. She was a tool, a checked box, a problem that looks like pearls. The breach spread like wildfire across platforms. News anchors read verbatim quotations on the air, and you could see how shocked they were. Legal experts disagreed on whether the papers may be used in a civil case. People on Reddit went through every sentence. Twitter didn't hold back. Memes, receipts, side-by-side comparisons of former relationships, and a tag that has gone viral, #We knew they did too. Then the whistleblower showed up. Her name was Dana, 34, Wycliffe Freight's former director of external affairs. She had quietly quit 6 weeks previously, saying that her morals were not in line with the company's. But now she was done being quiet. She sat in a plain t-shirt with no makeup or glam in a video she broadcast on Instagram Live. "I was on the team that handled the merger," she said, "and I'm not going to sit here and act like I didn't know what was going on behind the scenes. But I swear I won't stay quiet now." She talked about meetings where Ariel's qualifications were questioned, not for what they were, but for how they sounded. She also talked about how senior leadership talked about how to tame her ambition. One executive even declared on record, "She may run a company, but we still run the table." Dana said, "I tried to push back, but every time someone told me to stay in my lane. When I finally inquired if we were really working with Ariel or just using her name to make us look better, I was moved to a new job. I was gone in 2 weeks." More than 10 million people shared her video in less than a day. The story altered all of a sudden. This wasn't just one rude thing that happened during a gala. It was about a way of life, a pattern, a system so sure of how great it was that it couldn't see how bad it was getting. Corporate sponsors started to back out of partnerships with Wycliffe Freight. A few members of their advisory board quit in public, saying they couldn't agree on morals. One former congresswoman even sent back a campaign donation from the Wycliffes, saying their behavior was an insult to American decency. The Wycliffes still didn't say they were sorry in a formal way. They instead put out a bland statement about unfortunate events being misinterpreted and ongoing conversations about inclusion. The internet didn't believe it. There were more leaks. There was an internal Slack channel called Aurelia Integration, where mid-level managers made jokes about keeping her in line and worried about how she'd handle real power. Even Ariel's stillness started to get louder. She hadn't put anything up, hadn't been on TV, hadn't said a word to the press. But the storm kept getting worse, and the Wycliffes weren't in charge of the discourse anymore. It was too much for them. By the end of the week, a petition was going around asking the Securities and Exchange Commission to look into Wycliffe Freight for unfair business practices. In just 2 days, it got 500,000 signatures. The Department of Labor started an investigation. Ariel still didn't say anything. Not because she didn't have anything to say, but she was letting them talk themselves into trouble. And behind the scenes, she was getting ready for something that would last much longer than a press release. A time to pay. The press conference wasn't very exciting. There is no red carpet, no branded background, no hype crew telling her what to say in her ear. A simple podium in a meeting venue in downtown Chicago. There was a black curtain behind her, one light overhead. There are enough foldable chairs for the journalists and a few camera teams. No music, no logos for businesses, just quiet. At 3 p.m., Aurel King walked to the microphone quickly. She wasn't wearing a dress with a designer label or a bright color. She donned a clean white blouse and a plain blue jacket. No jewelry. Don't wear makeup. You don't need to. She didn't have a folder or a statement with her. She didn't require any notes. The message was her presence. The cameras clicked. Reporters moved closer. She moved the mic once. Then they peered straight into the sea of lenses. "Thanks for coming." Her voice was steady, measured, steady. She said, "I won't take up much of your time." Because this isn't about making up a story or fixing an image. This is about being clear. Truth. and the kind of leadership we all say we want but don't see too often. She stopped. I entered the merger with Wycliffe Freight in good faith. My business worked on it for 9 months. We thought, wrongly, that common value might bridge cultural gaps, that creativity may beat out ego, that relationship may imply anything real. Another break. But the world has seen what I've seen behind closed doors for months now. There was a monitor next to the podium that lit up and showed hacked emails and internal notes. I don't need to explain these. They say what they mean. There was no sound in the room. Disrespect is more than just an action. It's a way of life. It's built in. When the door is closed, it shows in how you talk, in who you choose to work for, in what you say when you believe no one is listening. She looked up again and made eye contact with the audience. And I won't mix my life's work with a machine that runs on bias. There it was, the breath that everyone had been holding. I am officially ending all talks about a merger with Wycliffe Freight, effective immediately. The words hung in the air like a sentence. There is no space for misunderstanding. There is no room for negotiation. Not put off, not thought about again. Finished. Let me be clear, she said, her voice getting louder. This is not a business choice. People made this choice. I created Aurelia Ventures from the ground up so that it wouldn't be eaten whole, but would stand tall. We don't help investors that turn a blind eye. We don't work with organizations that make money off of silence. There was a buzz in her pocket. She didn't look at it. The cameras didn't move. Reporters began to type very quickly. I want to talk to every black woman, every first-generation leader, and every voice that has been overlooked that is watching this. You don't have to put up with the things that are unacceptable, not for a place at the table, not for a certain amount of money, not for access. She stepped away from the podium for a moment to allow the words to sink in. Then she went back. And to the Wycliffes, I hope you can see the reflection that you have to gaze at now, and I hope you learn something from it. But I don't care if it does or doesn't anymore. A last break. We all have to make choices, and we all have to deal with what happens. She nodded once. Then they walked away. No questions, no follow-up, no planned exit. Only Ariel. She went off the stage the same way she walked off the dance floor, with calmness, with clarity, with strength. Within minutes, the announcement video went viral. People on Twitter dubbed it the most graceful corporate takedown ever. People on LinkedIn admired her bravery. The slogan, "You are not required to tolerate the intolerable," quickly became a motto on Instagram, appearing on everything from t-shirts to desktop backgrounds. In less than 48 hours, Wycliffe Freight lost 2 big government contracts and 3 longtime business partners. Their PR team worked hard to change the story, but it was too late. The shares fell another 11%. At the same time, Aurelia Ventures received around 500,000 new followers on social media, and Ariel was asked to talk at TED, Harvard Business School, and the United Nations Women in Leadership Summit. But she didn't do any interviews. She didn't go on tour. She just went back to work. Because for her, becoming viral was never the goal. The aim was to be heard. And now she was. Fire and sirens don't automatically mean collapse. It can start with emails that don't get answered, phones that don't ring anymore, meetings that are called off without notice. For the Wycliffes, that's how it all started. After Ariel King's press conference, the Wycliffe Freight executive floor was quiet, but not the type of quiet they could manage. People's phones were ringing with questions instead of opportunities. Requests from the press, questions about the law, panic inside. First, the people who put money in, a California pension fund and a New York-based venture group, 2 of their biggest stakeholders, said they were putting their trust on pause for a short time because of ethical risk and brand incompatibility. The price of the shares went down another 7% overnight. Then the board appeared. In less than 72 hours, 4 directors quit, including the only woman and the only person of color on the board. Words like irreparable, toxic, and ethically indefensible were used in their exit letters, which were leaked to the public. Harold Wycliffe, who used to be a symbol of stability, suddenly seemed like a man trapped by his own past. The kind of man who had spent decades building empires, but never stopped to think about who got hurt along the way. Marilyn Wycliffe completely disappeared from the public eye. Her PR charity quietly took her name off of 2 mentorship programs and put all of its charitable relationships on hold. No one responded when reporters called to ask for a remark. And what about Preston? Preston turned into a symbol, not of success. But what happens when privilege isn't checked? He was kicked out of his graduate business program pending further review, but insiders said it was permanent. The offers for his internship disappeared. No more brand collaborations. The yacht club where his family had been members for 3 generations even put out a statement saying, "We do not agree with the values that were recently shown." They erased his personal social media accounts. But not before images of earlier postings, jokes, and tone-deaf captions spread online, making the picture of a man nurtured in a bubble thick enough to misinterpret cruelty for confidence even clearer. Employees at Wycliffe Freight whispered about the end. Longtime workers packed up their workstations. HR got a lot of resignation letters. The mood plummeted to the bottom. There was a break in contracts. Partners started requesting audits. A planned move into the Pacific Northwest was put on hold for an unknown amount of time. Everyone knew that the Wycliffes had lost something they couldn't buy back, but no one spoke it out loud. Trustworthiness, reputation, have faith. And once they are gone, no balance statement can help you. The family met with lawyers behind closed doors. People who speak for others, experts in dealing with crises. They thought about changing their name. A different name, a younger person to put in front of the camera, but none of it worked. This wasn't just about a deal that went wrong. This was about holding up a mirror, and for the first time, the Wycliffes had to stare into it without being able to choose what they saw. For years, they had acted like they were the champions of modern logistics, the guardians of trade, and the pillars of tradition. But now, they were just another story to warn others. No one missed the irony. A multi-generational empire fell apart not because of sabotage or a market crisis, but because of one moment of unrestrained pride. A glass of wine. One woman who wouldn't back down. A Chicago newspaper ran a headline on the Friday after the press conference that summed it all up in 6 words. The Wycliffes lost more than money, and they did. They lost business partners. They lost their legacy. They lost the idea that they could do whatever they wanted without getting in trouble. But most importantly, they lost control of the story. Now, when someone Googled their name, they didn't find logistics conferences or business awards. They saw Ariel. They noticed her relaxed. They could see how strong she was. They saw her win. And what about the Wycliffes? They became the setting for a story that wasn't actually about them at all. It was about what happens when power and grace come together. And power doesn't give it enough credit. The world saw Ariel King soar with grace. What they didn't know was that she saw the fall coming long before it made the news. Before the wine, the video that went viral, the agreement that was called off. She saw everything. Power doesn't simply protect, it also gets ready. It began 2 months before the big event, late on a Friday night. There weren't many people in her workplace, and the city was quiet outside. The email came in at that time. The subject line was, "For your eyes only." No sign, no introduction, just a paper is attached. It was a thread that had been sent on, the internal chain of Wycliffe Freight, the same one that would subsequently be leaked to the public, but this one hadn't been seen yet. The words were easy to understand. Making fun of, not caring, strategic in all the wrong ways. There was one line that really stood out. Let her shine at the party. Then we pull it back in. Ariel looked at the screen for a long time. She wasn't surprised. No, not really. The tone was familiar, polished like a business, and full of old money arrogance. She wasn't surprised, but it did prove something. This was never going to be a business deal. It was going to be a show. She called her head of security the same night. They improved the security cameras at her office. In a quiet way, they hired a private company to keep an eye on Wycliffe's internal communications, all in a legal way. They ran background checks again. There was a record of every meeting. She didn't tell anyone, not even Maya, who was her closest counsel. It wasn't fear, it was foresight. She had learned early on in her profession that you don't win fights on the battlefield, you win them in the planning room. And she wasn't going to be caught without a weapon. So she set up traps, little ones, not obvious, not meant to provoke, but to reveal. She asked for copies of all signed contracts with the time they were signed, asked for written notes from the meeting. She sent internal calls over secure servers instead. She even asked Preston to lunch, even though she didn't want to go, just to see how he was doing. He was relaxed, proud, not careful. He talked too much, smirked too easily. He thought she needed him. That was a mistake on his part. The second twist? Ariel didn't just get that first email by accident. It came from someone who worked at Wycliffe. At the time, the source was unidentified, but subsequently it turned out to be Dana Aston, the same lady who would later speak out publicly. Dana had had enough. She had worked for Harold Wycliffe for 7 years, saw how meetings changed when a black woman came in, how someone with a different last name and a lighter skin tone threw out ideas and then used them again. Dana couldn't mend things from the inside, but she could warn someone who had a chance of winning from the outside. Ariel didn't merely take the warning, she made it into a weapon. Weeks before the press conference, she got ready for her speech. Not because she knew about the wine, but she thought something would happen. Disrespect always comes. It only changes clothing. Then came the gala. She didn't go into the room without knowing what was going on. She had already looked at the chessboard. All eyes, all of the cameras. Every time she talked, there was stillness. Every phony grin. And what about when Preston poured the wine? It was like poetry. She didn't only have rumors anymore, or quiet words, or emails that are coded. She saw something, a moment that no one could explain away. But the actual twist? She never wanted to get back at him. She needed proof that the system was still working. It was working just like it was supposed to, and she was done asking it to get better. Instead, she would show it. So she didn't freak out when the clip became viral. She didn't become angry. She simply waited. And the world wanted to know why she didn't say anything. She knew what to say. You don't debate when your truth is clear. You write things down, and then you give. She was never weak when she was quiet. It was the sound of planning. Before the boardrooms, before the news, before anyone ever clapped when she stepped into a room. Ariel King was just a girl who lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Gary, Indiana. There were more sirens than quietness there, and you learned to carry hope discreetly, like a dream you wrapped up and put in your back pocket. Denise, her mother, worked evenings at a group home and cleaned houses on the weekends. Jerome, her father, drove trucks to 3 states in a week to try to keep food on the table and the lights on. They didn't have much, but they gave her everything that was important. Books, control, wanting to know more, self-esteem. They never talked about their hardship as if it was a problem, even when money was tight, which it always was. It was only the background noise of a grander goal, a motive to work harder. From the beginning, Ariel was unusual. Not louder, not harder, just more sharp. She talked less than she listened. She paid attention to how people moved and how systems worked, or didn't. She didn't say anything when she was the only black girl in her gifted class. She scored more points than any other kid in the room, but the world still paid attention to her, and not always in a nice way. She applied for a well-known summer business program run by a local university when she was in high school. She was 15 years old, captain of the debate team and a perfect GPA, a beautiful letter of recommendation from her math teacher. She was turned down, not because they weren't good enough, but because, as the letter said, of cultural compatibility concerns. She remembered that saying. She remembers sitting on the edge of her bed and looking at those words. She remembered that her mother didn't say anything at first. She just stood in the doorway with her hands on her hips and shook her head. Finally, her mother stated, "They're afraid of what you'll do with a real chance. Go ahead and make one for yourself." That was the time. The switch turned on. Ariel didn't weep. That letter was printed by her, put it in a frame, put it on her desk. Then she got to work. Grants and scholarships, classes with 2 credits, competitions for public speaking, internships that didn't pay but let her in. She said yes to every door that opened, even if it meant going into places where she wasn't welcome. She got her MBA when she was 25. At 28, she was in charge of a department at a Fortune 500 business. She established Aurelia Ventures out of a co-working space and a dream when she was 32. But she always remembered that letter. She never forgot how it felt to be told you don't fit, not because of what you don't have, but only because of who you are. So she made her business the exact opposite of that. She hired people who had been passed over. She taught women of color. Instead of putting contracts out to big companies, she awarded them to small businesses. She thought people should get second opportunities. She thought first impressions should be free of bias. Ariel didn't lead with her ego. It was about understanding. She knew what it was like to be the smartest person in the room and still be doubted. She knew what it was like to have someone steal your ideas, critique your tone, and explain your genius to you in simpler terms. She had made it through everything. And it didn't make her stronger. It made her focus. She didn't go through life trying to prove people wrong. She moved to show that she was right. So the Wycliffes chuckled when Preston poured the wine. People all over the world clutched their breath to see how she would react. She didn't do it out of anger. She did it from memory, from every room that made her feel like she didn't belong. She had transformed every no into a plan. She had to grin through disrespect at all times simply to go one step closer to her goal. She had been through worse, and she was stronger when she left. So yeah, her quiet was strong. But what about her story? That was what made her unstoppable. Ariel King didn't just start a business, she made a plan. For any female who has ever been ordered to wait her turn. For every woman who has been spoken over in meetings. For every leader who was judged before she even said anything. She had all of them. And that's why when she stood at that platform, looked into that camera and stated, "We all make choices and we all live with the consequences," she was talking to more than simply the Wycliffes. She was talking to every system that tried to stop her from talking, and every young girl watching, saying softly, "That could be me." Ariel King never wanted to be a symbol. She didn't launch Aurelia Ventures to make a point. She started it to fix genuine problems, including gaps in efficiency, broken infrastructure, and digital blind spots. Her goal was simple, to make systems that were smarter and helped people more. But only after the booze, after the walk-off, after the press conference that changed the way people talked about fairness in American business, she discovered something. Making noise wasn't enough. It was time to make something that would last longer than a moment. It was time to leave a legacy. 2 weeks after the deal fell through, Ariel sat down with 7 other founders, Black, Latino, Asian, and Native American, at a roundtable meeting. All leaders. In some way, all of them were missed. Everyone was tired of waiting for change to happen in boardrooms where they never heard their names. She didn't have a speech ready. She asked a question. What if we stopped asking for seats and started building the table ourselves? That's how colorful CEOs came to be. Not as a reaction to injustice, but as a way to put money into something that was already strong but needed more money. The idea was audacious but simple. Set up a national fund to help businesses run by minority founders grow and succeed. Not a charity, not a publicity stunt. an actual fund, with real money, made by folks who knew what it was like to battle. They got $18 million in private equity in the first month. It was more than $70 million by the second. Investors came from unexpected places, like Silicon Valley leaders who had stayed quiet during the Wycliffe scandal but now wanted to do something. Entertainment moguls who thought Ariel's story was the kind of leadership Hollywood couldn't write. And even a few big companies that had changed their minds and were ready to back more than just words. But Ariel only let certain people in. Every investor had to sign a public promise that they wouldn't have any controlling interests, veto power, or say in how the tale was told. This wasn't about how things looked. This was about who owns what. The fund didn't only give out checks. It provided legal help, marketing development, mental health assistance, and coaching. It put youthful business owners in touch with older executives who looked like them, who knew the regulations that weren't expressed, who not only taught how to climb, but also how to live. Within 48 hours, the application portal was full. A Haitian-American IT engineer from Miami wrote in her application letter, "This is the first time I've asked for money and not felt like I had to hide my story." Another founder, a queer Vietnamese-American chef who is starting a line of plant-based foods, said, "I used to practice code switching before every pitch. This time I talked like myself, and they heard me." That was the whole objective. Ariel didn't want to be thanked. She wanted to be free. The freedom that comes with not being the first or only person in the room. The type that people share, multiplied, scaled. She spoke first at the occasion that started the fund. It wasn't fancy. No bright lighting. No introductions by famous people. A mic and a message are all you need. She said, "We're not here to prove ourselves anymore. We've already done that. We're here to put money on each other." Forever! In the first week, 4.2 million people watched the video of her address. But it wasn't all she did. She worked with HBCUs and tribal universities to start accelerator programs. She talked with high school students in Detroit, New Orleans, and Oakland. She gave more than simply money. She also gave laptops. Not just scholarships, but also paid internships. And at the end of every city she went to, she said the same thing. Don't let anyone give you power. Make it. The fund wasn't just about money for long. It was an action, a new pipe, a change in where money went and who got to write the destiny of American industry. Ariel knew it would take a long time. For a long time, maybe decades. But she didn't mind. She wasn't building for rapid profits. She was building for the girl who lived in a modest flat and read business books by flashlight. For the young man who was trying to sell to a room full of people who had already determined he didn't belong. For every potential CEO who just needed to hear someone say, "I see you," and mean it. A tweet began it. Someone who silently observed the Wycliffe controversy evolve from afar and worked as a film producer in Los Angeles wrote a simple message. This isn't just a narrative about business. It's a movie that needs to be made. Someone call Ariel King. In just a few hours, it got more than 200,000 likes. By the end of the week, Ariel's team had received calls from 4 big studios, 2 big streaming services, and a famous filmmaker whose last movie won an Oscar. But Ariel didn't want a deal that made the news. She wasn't here to sell her tale to someone who would change it into a tidy little redemption narrative, make it easier to understand, and cast a version of her that looked like the notion of her, not the fact. So she went to the meetings, every one of them, and then she made a decision. She didn't give permission for the tale. She helped make it. She would have the right to approve the script, choose the actors, and make the final cut. No compromises. She worked with a production firm run by women of color that was known for telling stories that Hollywood was too scared to address. They put together a writing team that included not just screenwriters, but also journalists, activists, and corporate leaders who knew the layers. Who could combine stress in the boardroom with emotional truth? Who could be strong and quiet at the same time? The title of the work is The Glass Floor. It meant more than just a sign. It was real. Ariel had walked on clear, fragile expectations her whole life that were meant to hold her back, not raise her up. It took months to cast the show. Ariel didn't want to meet a famous person. She wanted someone who could handle the quiet, who could say a lot with only a look, who didn't need to yell to be remembered. They found her, an actress on the rise who is better renowned for her work in theater than in movies. Power that is quiet, presence that can't be denied. And when she took over Ariel's role during the first table read, everyone cried. The wine didn't start the movie. It started with Ariel as a child, sitting on the floor next to her mother's ironing board and reading a business magazine she had found at a thrift store. A moment that no camera had ever caught, yet everyone who saw it would feel it. And it didn't stop there. Ariel gave a surprise speech to a group of girls in STEM in a high school gym in Detroit. One of them said, "How do you know when to say something?" The character said, "You don't. You just know when it's time to stop being quiet." The trailer was less than 2 minutes long when it came out. It didn't have any dialogue, only music. Shots of people staring without saying anything. Doors are closed, boardrooms that are empty. A woman is by herself in an elevator. Then a close-up of wine striking satin, a heartbeat, and one line that was whispered. Sometimes the loudest answer is silence. The trailer went viral. Streaming services fought over who would get to show the first episode. Film festivals had openings on the first night. Activists, teachers, and business schools all ordered a lot of screenings ahead of time. Ariel did have one condition, though. The first showing wouldn't be in LA or New York City. It would be in Gary, Indiana, in the same community center where she learned to type for the first time. In the first place, she stood in front of a room and talked about an idea, where her mother used to pass out flyers for tutoring nights while Ariel completed her homework under the folding table. The carpet wasn't red that night. It was a deep blue, the hue she liked best. The lighting was gentle. The popcorn didn't cost anything. Her parents sat in the front row, smiling with delight. No cameras behind the scenes. No interviews that are only for you. A woman just watching her story come full circle. Not to applaud a scandal, but to honor what she had made of it, and to remind the next generation that the best stories are the ones we live through, even if they are quiet, brave, and on our own terms. Not all the time does power come in with a loud voice. Sometimes it comes in gently, in silence, in check, in the choice to stand your ground without having to say why you belong there. That was the lesson Ariel King taught, not only through the business she started, not through the news, not even the scandal that made her famous, but because she never shrank, no matter how small they attempted to make her. Strength is often thought of as volume. We can quantify that power by how loud we clap back, how quickly we respond, and how many people we can get to look at us. But what about true strength? Power in the real world? It's the time when you choose not to give up your calm simply to be with someone else in their chaos. Ariel had every right to lose it, to hit out, to make her sorrow into a show. But she didn't. She made it into a structure, into a plan, into gas. She told the world that having dignity does not mean being weak, that silence doesn't mean giving up, and that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is not let things get to you. She chose intention in a world that was concerned with reaction. In a world that wanted her to explain herself, she made places where she didn't have to. Her story was more than just a headline. It turned into a mirror for any woman who has ever been told she is too much or not enough. For every person of color who has had to change the way they speak to feel safe at a meeting. For every child voice that was taught to wait their turn, be quiet, or follow rules that were never made for them. Ariel did not set the table on fire. She built more than it did. That's the important lesson. You don't have to yell to be heard. You just need to know who you are before people try to tell you. You just have to be calm, even when the ground shakes. Just remember that no amount of polish, legacy, or pedigree can stop someone who won't be bought, silenced, or belittled. And if you're listening to this right now, it could be you. You might be at the point where you have to make a choice. You might have been carrying your silence like a weight. You might have forgotten that quiet can also be a weapon. So, just a little reminder, you don't have to shout to be strong. You don't have to be flawless to be valuable. People who have already decided not to see you don't need to prove anything to you. You only need to make a choice. You're done getting smaller. You don't have to say you're sorry for taking up space anymore. You don't need anyone's permission to be whatever you already are, because no one else can tell you how much you are worth. No one has the right to decide how dignified you are, and no one can pour anything on you, whine, condemnation, or shame, and leave you alone. Ariel King never wanted to be a symbol. She just didn't want to be a victim. And by doing this, she let the rest of us get up, to be in charge, to own our voice, even if we don't want to use it. And maybe that's what the world needs more of right now. Not louder voices, but a bolder quiet. Not revenge, but seeing. Not noise, but grace. Is like truth that cuts through everything. If this tale meant something to you, if something inside you moved while you listened, if you felt like someone saw you, even for a second, then stay with us. There is more to this channel than stories. It's a place to feel, to keep in mind, to fix things. So don't just keep scrolling. Take a moment, take a deep breath. And if you haven't already, think about signing up. Not for us, for you. To remind you that you don't have to ask for respect. It comes with a decision. And what about your story? It's only starting.